Be me, Margaret, 32, working in corporate compliance. Married to Austin for 4 years. He's this brilliant software architect who makes good money. Everything was fine until I started really thinking about consent culture. Not because of any blogs or whatever, just from discussions with my friends at work. We'd talk during lunch breaks about how men just assume things. How they don't really understand enthusiastic ongoing consent. Started reading academic papers about it during my commute. The more I learned, the more I realized Austin and I had never properly formalized our intimate arrangements. One day, I'm reviewing contracts at work. Compliance documentation, liability waivers, all that corporate stuff. Light bulb moment hits me. Why don't relationships have the same level of documentation and clarity? Why should physical intimacy be any different from a business transaction? Both parties should have clear expectations and documented agreement. It just makes logical sense, from a legal and ethical standpoint. That evening I bring it up with Austin over dinner. Honey, I've been thinking about how we approach intimacy. He looks up from his pasta, raises an eyebrow. I think we need to implement some basic documentation processes. Explain how consent should be explicit, documented, and renewable. Tell him about enthusiastic ongoing consent and how verbal agreements aren't sufficient. Verbal contracts are basically worthless in every other area of life. Austin just stares at me for a long moment. You want to document our sex life. I want to ensure we both have clear, enthusiastic, legally sound consent frameworks. Spent the next week drafting what I called intimate activity consent forms. Used my compliance background to make them thorough and legally rigorous. Included sections for specific activities, duration parameters, safe words, and revocation procedures. Even added liability clauses and witness signature lines. Was actually pretty proud of how comprehensive and professional they looked. Brought them home on a Friday night, presented them to Austin like a business proposal. Austin reads through all 12 pages slowly, keeps glancing up at me with this weird expression. Margaret, this is very thorough. Thank you, I wanted to make sure we covered all possible scenarios. He flips to the appendix with the activity-specific subsections. You have a separate form for holding hands. Physical contact is physical contact, Austin. Consent doesn't have gradations. Explain how this protects both of us from any misunderstandings or assumptions. How it ensures everything we do is enthusiastically agreed upon by both parties. Austin sets the forms down carefully, and you want us to fill these out every time. Well, the standard forms are good for 48 hours unless revoked in writing, but for spontaneous activities, yes, we'd need real-time documentation. Show him the quick consent mobile forms I created for urgent situations. Only 3 pages each can be completed in under 10 minutes. Austin nods slowly, like he's processing complex technical specifications. This is important to you. Austin, enthusiastic consent is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Expected some pushback, honestly. Men usually get defensive when you challenge their assumptions about consent, but Austin just picks up a pen. Okay, let's do this properly then. Starts filling out form IC001, General Intimate Activity Consent Documentation. Reads every single line, checks every box thoughtfully, even adds detailed notes in the margins about boundaries and preferences, signs and dates, everything with the same care he uses for software deployment documents. That first night with the forms was different. Austin insisted we review everything twice before proceeding, made sure I had properly initialed each subsection, kept stopping to verify that specific activities were covered under the signed documentation. According to Section 3.2.1, this requires additional written confirmation. Had to pause everything to fill out supplementary consent form IC007. By the time we finished all the paperwork, it was pretty late, but I felt so empowered knowing everything was properly documented and consensual. Austin adapted to the system faster than I expected, started carrying the mobile consent forms in his wallet. Would pull them out whenever we were about to hold hands or hug. Just need you to initial Section B, subsection 4. Became incredibly meticulous about following every protocol exactly. Would set timers to remind us when our 48-hour general consents were expiring. Even created a shared calendar system to track our documentation schedules. Few weeks in, started noticing Austin was less spontaneous. Used to surprise me with random kisses or hand-holding. Now he'd always check his watch first, pull out the appropriate forms. I'd like to request intimate contact. Can you review and sign Section C? Would wait patiently while I read through everything and provided written consent. Stopped initiating anything that wasn't pre-scheduled in our documentation system. Told myself this was good. This was what proper consent culture looked like. Austin became obsessed with the forms in a way I hadn't anticipated. started suggesting additional documentation requirements. Shouldn't we have separate forms for different locations? What about environmental factors like temperature and lighting preferences? Began drafting supplementary forms faster than I could review them. Form IC 023, consent for intimate activities during meal preparation. Form IC 031, documentation for physical contact while watching television. Created an entire filing system organized by date and activity type. Friends started commenting that Austin and I seemed different. Sarah mentioned we looked very formal together at dinner parties. Watched Austin pull out a quick consent form before putting his arm around me. Saw him wait for me to initial it before proceeding. You guys are so procedural now. Tried to explain how this represented evolved relationship dynamics, how we were modeling proper consent culture for other couples. But Sarah just looked confused. Around month 3, realized something felt off. Austin still completed all the documentation perfectly. Never missed a deadline, never failed to get proper signatures. But he stopped. I don't know. Being romantic about it. Used to look into my eyes when we were close. Now he'd be checking the forms to make sure we were in compliance. Section 2.3 specifies eye contact duration. We're approaching the limit. Would pull back exactly when the documented time frame expired. Started feeling like Austin was treating intimacy like a work project. Which was weird because this was supposed to enhance our connection. The forms were supposed to create space for enthusiastic consent. Instead, Austin seemed to be following them like technical specifications. Would complete intimate activities exactly as documented, nothing more, nothing less. Began to feel mechanical, like he was just checking boxes, but couldn't complain because he was following my system perfectly. Tried talking to Austin about bringing back some spontaneity. Maybe we could be a little more flexible with the documentation requirements. Austin looked genuinely confused. But Margaret, you said enthusiastic consent requires proper documentation. You spent weeks creating these forms to ensure we never operated on assumptions. Pulled out a stack of our completed paperwork. We have documented evidence of enthusiastic consent for every interaction. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? Realized Austin was right, technically. He was implementing my consent framework flawlessly. Every form properly completed, every signature obtained, every protocol followed. But something was missing that I couldn't quite identify. The passion felt administrative, like Austin was fulfilling contractual obligations rather than expressing love. But when I tried to explain this, it sounded contradictory. How could I complain about him following the consent procedures I insisted on? Austin started suggesting we expand the documentation system further. We should probably formalize emotional intimacy too. Began drafting Form X001, Emotional Connection, Consent Documentation. Just want to make sure you're enthusiastically consenting to vulnerable conversations. Required written approval before he could share feelings or ask about my day. Had to initial separate sections for different levels of emotional disclosure. Austin would stop mid-conversation if we exceeded the documented parameters. Things escalated when Austin created the Romantic Gesture Authorization System. Form RG001 required 72-hour advance notice for any surprise activities. Had to specify exact gift details, timing, and expected emotional responses. Austin submitted a formal request to bring me flowers. Included cost breakdown, flower type preferences, and optimal delivery timing. Waited for my written approval before proceeding with the romantic gesture. Somehow this felt less romantic than just bringing flowers. 6 months in, our entire relationship ran on documentation. Austin maintained perfect compliance with every form and protocol. Never once violated any consent boundary or procedural requirement, but I felt lonelier than I had when we first started dating. Everything felt like a business transaction being properly executed. Austin would complete intimate activities with the same energy he used for debugging code. Efficient, thorough, technically correct, completely soulless. Tried to talk to my friend Jessica about what was happening. Austin follows every consent protocol perfectly, but something feels wrong. Jessica asked if he was being respectful and honoring my boundaries. Yes, absolutely. He's incredibly respectful. Does he make sure you're comfortable and enthusiastically participating? Yes, he documents everything thoroughly. Jessica looked confused about why I was complaining. Couldn't articulate what was missing without sounding contradictory. Austin's systematic approach started affecting other areas of our relationship. Began requiring written consent for social activities. Need your signature approving tonight's dinner conversation topics. Created forms as 001, Social Activity Participation Agreement. Would submit guest lists for advance approval before accepting party invitations. Required documented consent before making any shared financial decisions. treated our entire marriage like a compliance audit. Breaking point came during our anniversary dinner. Austin arrived with a stack of forms 3 inches thick. I've prepared comprehensive documentation for tonight's activities. Form A001, Anniversary Activity Consent. Documentation. Included subsections for dinner conversation, gift exchange, and post-dinner activities. Austin explained each section methodically while I stared at the paperwork. Section 4.2 covers nostalgic reminiscence. Section 5.1 addresses future planning. Realized I was spending our anniversary reading legal documentation. Sat there at dinner, watching Austin check his watch against our signed timeline. According to Section 3.1, we should transition to gift exchange in 4 minutes. Pulled out form GG001, gift exchange consent verification. Just need you to confirm you're enthusiastically consenting to receive presents. Other couples around us were laughing and talking spontaneously. We were managing our anniversary like a corporate merger. Austin handed me a gift exactly when the form specified, smiled exactly as documented. Something clicked watching Austin mechanically follow our anniversary timeline. Realized he was treating our entire relationship like code execution, following my consent protocols with perfect accuracy but zero authentic emotion. Every romantic gesture had become a documented procedure. Every intimate moment was managed through proper channels. Austin had gamified our relationship and was winning by following my rules exactly. Confronted Austin that night after completing Form A015, post-anniversary discussion authorization. This isn't what I meant when I talked about consent culture. Austin looked genuinely puzzled. But Margaret, I'm following every protocol you established. I document everything, get proper signatures, respect all boundaries. Every interaction we have is based on enthusiastic written consent. Pulled out our filing cabinet full of completed forms. We have the most thoroughly documented relationship in history. Tried to explain that consent was supposed to enhance our connection, not replace it. Austin nodded thoughtfully. But you said verbal agreements weren't sufficient. You said physical intimacy should be treated like any business transaction. You created these forms to ensure we never operated on assumptions. Austin was right and I hated it. He had implemented my system exactly as I designed it. The problem wasn't that he was doing it wrong. The problem was that my system was working perfectly. Austin continued. You wanted legal and ethical clarity in our relationship. You said enthusiastic consent requires proper documentation. I've spent months learning your protocols and following them precisely. Now you're saying you want me to ignore the consent framework you created. Couldn't argue with his logic without admitting my entire approach was flawed. Felt trapped by my own ideology and Austin's perfect implementation of it. Things got worse when Austin started involving lawyers. I think we need professional review of our consent documentation. Contacted his attorney friend David to review our forms for legal sufficiency. David spent 3 hours going through our filing system. Suggested additional liability protections and arbitration clauses. Austin implemented every recommendation immediately. Our relationship became legally bulletproof and emotionally bankrupt. Austin began requiring witnesses for major consent forms. Just want to ensure everything is properly validated. Had to call Jessica over to witness my signature on Form IC047, Weekend Activity Consent. She watched in horror as Austin explained the various subsections and deadlines. Jessica pulled me aside afterward. Margaret, what the hell is happening to you guys? Couldn't explain without admitting my consent system had become a monster. Final straw came when Austin presented me with a 47-page comprehensive relationship audit. I've been analyzing our consent documentation for efficiency improvements. Had created charts showing our form completion times and compliance rates. Suggested we implement a digital system to streamline the approval process. Wanted to automate routine consent requests and create approval workflows. Austin was proposing to turn our marriage into enterprise software. Stared at Austin's relationship audit with growing horror. Realized he had transformed every aspect of our marriage into a documented process. Spontaneous affection required form IC023 with 24-hour processing time. Surprise gifts needed 72-hour advance authorization through proper channels. Even casual conversations required pre-approved topic lists and time limits. Our relationship had become a bureaucratic nightmare that I had created. Austin presented his findings with PowerPoint slides. Our current system is highly effective but could benefit from optimization. Showed graphs of our consent compliance rates and processing efficiency. Recommended quarterly relationship audits and annual form reviews. Suggested hiring a part-time administrator to manage our documentation backlog. Was completely serious about professionalizing our marriage. Watching Austin click through slides about our relationship metrics broke something in me. Realized I had turned the man I loved into a compliance robot. He was following my consent protocols with inhuman precision, but had completely stopped being Austin in the process. The spontaneous, loving man I married had been replaced by a bureaucratic automaton. And it was entirely my fault for creating this system. Tried one last time to talk to Austin about scaling back the documentation. Maybe we could just be more spontaneous sometimes. Austin pulled out our original conversations from 6 months ago, had kept detailed notes about my insistence on proper consent frameworks. But Margaret, you said assumptions were dangerous in relationships. You said enthusiastic consent requires explicit documentation. Are you saying you want me to ignore your clearly stated boundaries? Austin had me completely trapped. Couldn't ask him to be more spontaneous without contradicting my own consent ideology. Couldn't complain about the documentation without admitting it was excessive. Couldn't request less formality without invalidating everything I'd insisted on. He was using my own arguments against me with perfect logical consistency. Felt like I was drowning in my own bureaucratic creation. Austin continued implementing new procedural improvements daily, created a digital dashboard to track our relationship metrics, installed time management software to optimize our consent processing workflow, began generating automated reports on our intimacy compliance rates, treated our marriage like a complex technical system requiring constant optimization, seemed genuinely proud of his efficiency improvements. Other couples started avoiding us at social events. Watching Austin pull out forms before simple interactions made everyone uncomfortable. Saw him require written consent before participating in group conversations. Would excuse himself to review documentation before engaging in casual banter. People began excluding us from spontaneous gatherings. Couldn't handle Austin's requirement for advanced written authorization. Jessica finally confronted me directly. Margaret, you've ruined your marriage. Austin used to be fun and spontaneous and loving. Now he's like a robot following some insane protocol manual. What the hell were you thinking? Tried to explain how this was about proper consent culture and boundary respect. Jessica just stared at me like I'd lost my mind. You wanted him to treat intimacy like a business transaction. Congratulations, mission accomplished. He's treating your entire relationship like a legal contract now. Hope you're happy with your documented, consent-verified, soul-crushing marriage. Jessica left that day and hasn't spoken to me since. Realized I was losing friends along with my husband's authentic affection. Austin reached peak optimization when he hired an actual assistant, Rebecca, who will help us manage our consent documentation workload. Introduced me to this professional young woman who would be processing our forms. Rebecca had a background in contract administration and seemed completely unfazed. I'll ensure all your intimate activity requests are processed within 24 hours. Standard turnaround for complex, multi-party consent. Documentation is 48 hours. Watching Rebecca set up a filing system for our relationship paperwork was surreal. She created color-coded folders for different activity categories, installed professional document management software on Austin's computer, began generating weekly reports on our consent processing efficiency. Austin reviewed these reports like quarterly business assessments. Our marriage had become Rebecca's part-time job. Rebecca proved more efficient than I expected, streamlined our form approval process and reduced processing delays, created standardized templates for routine consent requests, implemented automated reminder systems for expiring documentation. Austin was thrilled with the improved workflow and response times. I was watching my marriage become a well-oiled administrative machine. Breaking point finally arrived when Austin scheduled our divorce consultation. I've prepared comprehensive documentation for relationship dissolution, had spent weeks creating detailed asset division forms and custody agreements, approached ending our marriage with the same systematic thoroughness as everything else, presented me with Form Dr. 001, divorce request consent documentation, required my signature to proceed with formal separation procedures, stared at the divorce forms in complete shock. Austin, you can't be serious about this. But Margaret, you taught me that major life decisions require proper documentation. I'm following your established protocols for relationship management. This ensures we dissolve our marriage with enthusiastic mutual consent. Austin had weaponized my own consent system to destroy our marriage. Realized Austin had outplayed me completely, used my own ideology and procedures against me with devastating effectiveness, turned my consent framework into a systematic relationship destruction tool, followed every protocol I'd established while slowly eliminating all authentic connection, was ending our marriage using the exact same principles I'd insisted on. Felt like I'd been checkmated by my own chess pieces. Austin explained his reasoning with terrifying logic. Our relationship audit shows declining satisfaction despite perfect compliance. Documentation efficiency has improved, but emotional metrics are failing. I think we're incompatible long-term partners based on available data. This dissolution process ensures we separate ethically and consensually. Was treating our divorce like a systems analysis conclusion. Tried one final desperate argument. Austin, what about love? What about our connection? He pulled out a thick folder of our completed consent forms. Margaret, I have documented evidence of every interaction we've had for months. The data shows our relationship has become purely transactional. I'm now more efficient at processing your consent requests than connecting with you emotionally. This system you created has eliminated everything that made us work as a couple. Austin continued with devastating precision. You wanted our relationship managed through proper channels. You insisted on documented consent for every level of intimacy. I implemented your system perfectly, and it destroyed everything spontaneous between us. Now I'm using your own framework to dissolve our marriage consensually. This is exactly what you asked for when you demanded bureaucratic relationship management. Sitting there with divorce papers designed using my own consent ideology. Realized Austin had been systematically following my instructions toward this exact outcome. Had turned my feminist principles into a weapon against our marriage. Used my own logic to demonstrate why our relationship couldn't survive my system. Felt completely defeated by a man who had simply done exactly what I asked. Austin handed me a pen with the same careful formality he'd used for months. Just need your signature on section 12.4 to initiate divorce proceedings. I've documented that this dissolution is enthusiastically agreed upon by both parties. Our separation will be the most thoroughly consensual divorce in legal history. Rebecca has already prepared the filing timeline, signed the divorce forms with shaking hands, realized I had spent months teaching Austin to treat our relationship like a business contract. He had learned that lesson perfectly and was now terminating our contract professionally. Lost my marriage to my own ideology, implemented by someone smarter than me. Austin walked away with half our assets and perfect documentation, proving I'd agreed to everything. Austin's final message was delivered through Rebecca. He wanted me to remind you that enthusiastic consent works both ways. He's now enthusiastically consenting to be divorced from you, said to thank you for teaching him that relationships are just business transactions, and that he's much better at business than you realized. Sitting alone in my apartment surrounded by boxes of our relationship documentation. Hundreds of completed consent forms representing the systematic destruction of my marriage. Austin had used my own feminist principles to outsmart me completely. Turned my ideology into a weapon that eliminated everything I actually wanted. Destroyed my marriage by following my instructions with perfect, methodical precision. Realized too late that Austin had been several steps ahead of me the entire time. Understood my system better than I did and used it against me brilliantly. Transformed my consent framework into a relationship termination process. Showed me exactly where my ideology led when implemented by someone who could think systematically. Lost everything to a man who simply took my ideas to their logical conclusion. Margaret here, living alone with my perfectly documented divorce. Lost the love of my life to my own bureaucratic, feminist nightmare. Austin is probably laughing somewhere while I sit surrounded by consent forms that destroyed everything good about our relationship. Turns out, demanding that love be managed like a corporate compliance audit kills love entirely. Who could have possibly predicted that treating intimacy like paperwork would eliminate intimacy? Certainly not me, apparently.